Welcome back, friends and scoundrels, to Word Wolf Unchained. I am Bran,
And I'm Lynn.
and we're going to talk about movies that are supposed to be scary.
But are not, in fact, scary.
Yeah. Today is a little bonus episode for the Stepford Wives, new and old. We're talking about both versions of the Stepford Wives, the 75 and the 2004.
Correct.
But real quick before we get into that, do me some favors, and if you're listening as a podcast, give me some rates and reviews wherever you're listening at. And if you're watching on YouTube, give me a thumb. Doesn't matter which one. And leave a comment. Tell me what you like, what you don't like. Be honest. I got thick skin. Anyways, like I said, doing kind of a comparison of the two movies. Maybe touching on some subjects that we might have maybe had wrong in our first conversation about Stepford Wives, or maybe getting into a little bit better. We'll see where it goes. I don't have the best notes.
I don't have any notes.
So let's just start with the openings. Or the beginnings.
The newer one had a better setup for why they moved to Stepford. And not just the setup of why they moved, because that's not really too important. But it gives a look into the main characters and who they are.
A little bit, yeah. It definitely does that a little bit better. One of the things I like about is something you mentioned in the other conversation about between the book and the original movie is the fear of loss of identity and conformity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's the newer one takes that a little bit further with her losing her job as the CEO of this network. By the way, there's going to be spoilers. I always forget to do that too. But she loses that, and so it's not just fear of losing that identity. She has lost an identity already. Yes. So then it's exacerbated a little bit by this further fear of just completely losing yourself altogether.
I see what you mean.
And it's also interesting too that in the beginning she's already kind of like a robot, and this journey sends her, or this the events of the movie send her on a journey to maybe become more human.
I think she becomes more human by the end.
She does, but I think it gets lost in the very end.
A bit, yeah.
Like with the final ending of the movie. Which we could touch on that a little bit more too. But when she gets fired and she's reacting to it after walking out of the office, it's her movements are like a robot glitching and fritzing out, and
yeah, they are. And then she just has that total meltdown,
and then has to go through shock therapy, which was not a thing in 2004. But whatever.
Are you sure about that?
I'm pretty sure. I thought it was outlawed because it's torture.
Oh, I thought you were implying that it wasn't, invented yet.
No.
Like, that's old as shit, man.
No. They weren't allowed to do it anymore. As opposed to... So all of that, as opposed to the 1975 version where it starts off with her in her house alone and very confined there in a lot of shots, which is interesting. I tried to read into the wallpaper a little bit. was a very busy, interesting wallpaper.
I'm always sitting around trying to read the wallpaper.
Well, because I'm assuming it was in the bathroom, but it had like leopards and stuff, and uh, trying to pay a little bit of attention to it and see if it had any meaning. But they just get in the car and leave, and then the opening credits is over them driving in their station wagon to Stepford. Almost called it Stanford. Now I might struggle with that. And they get there and then fight about it.
Yeah, you would think they would fight about it before you actually move.
Yeah, right. I don't know. Like I pointed out with some of those things on the rewatch, sometimes you don't really get those emotions until after you've done it. The questioning, and I mean, it's something that happens all throughout, but once you've done it, you're on the path. It's, I don't know. Maybe you finally just fully accept the emotions.
I don't know.
Something you pointed out, the differences of the children's.
Oh, yeah, the difference of the way that children are portrayed when they are actually portrayed, because they're kind of shoved off a lot. But again, the conformity and the non-conformity. In the older one, the children, and I'm not saying the children are robots. They're more conformed with their uniforms, and they're quietly sitting on the bus. But in the newer one, they're
all the children run rampant.
Yeah, they're allowed to run free, and it takes, I think, the Stepford wife to the takes in the mother aspect more, because the mother would just take care of the children and not, restrict them in a way.
Yeah. Like how once Bobby in the newer one changes.
Yes.
And she's, oh, I'm glad you emailed me your lists. Here's your crazy ass lunches. And the ones, where's my action figures? Oh, here's $500.
Because children are meant to be children, not stuffed into their little box.
Not proto adults.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have much more to add to that.
I mean, it's kind of mentioned in the older one when Walter gets mad, some of the things he verbally throws at her when she says she wants to move. He says, I work 80 hours a week, and we have a good house, and our children look like they're on welfare.
Yeah. Maybe. I think that's more just a dig at her. The things you say when you're trying to hurt somebody versus what you actually think. Because they're fighting, and he's a lawyer, so he would be good at that. Missing the setup in the newer one. Oh, I know what that's about. The setup of the robots. Or the difference in setup, maybe. So, like the older one, they draw the women and collect their voices, and...
Oh, yeah, because they have, in the newer one, the smart house, which we assumed.
Yeah, it doesn't directly say, but because there isn't all this other stuff going on kind of in the background with the men's association doing things openly, but having an obvious purpose, like when she's allowed to sit in at the meeting, and it's really there just that way. Ike, right?
Yes.
Ike can draw her, but there's nothing directly said in the newer movie. They just make robots. Or whatever.
I think we can safely infer that the smart house is.
I think we could too. And that might have been one of the things that we need to trim a couple more minutes just because.
Yeah.
But, if you've got a house that can read your urine sample for you and tell you exactly what's wrong, I think it's safe to say that it's got everything else. Nothing more on that?
Nothing.
differences in the premise overall.
So
Also, like, a lot of these earlier notes were made while we were watching the original too. So
yeah, well, because the reason we originally did this, which we don't think we've said yet, is because we noticed the newer one is more of a parody of the old one.
well, it's this. I think I phrased it as it's. You can definitely see the satire, but it pushes going into parody.
Yes.
Because I think it spends just as much time satirizing the original one as it does the content, the messaging, or whatever.
Like at the meeting that Joanna sits in on, they are talking about a fundraiser of some kind, and they mention a barn dance and a tag sale and a cakewalk. And then in the newer one, Joanna, there's the picnic where Joanna meets Bobby and Roger rather than through the welcome lady paper, because that doesn't happen
Yeah.
in the newer one. And there's a barn dance, and
Which I do like that because that's a lot more natural. But anyways,
it is the barn dance and the
the bake
sales,
sale
yes.
and
because they said the men said it would be, they didn't say silly, but that's what I'm going to use. They said it would be silly to do a bunch of little things at once, and that's what they did in the new one, was a bunch of little things at once. Because in the older one, when they were talking about their probably fake fundraiser,
yeah,
they just wanted to do one big one, and that doing a bunch of little ones would be silly. So in the newer one, they did a bunch of little ones.
yeah.
And then the dog.
Well, not only, but the Christmas thing.
Yes.
Isn't it a little early to be thinking about Christmas?
So they have the Christmas book at the book club and their little jingle sing along.
And the newer one with where the women are allowed to have clubs allowed to have. I quoted that. Which we'll get into that a little bit more later, but the bigger part of the premise is the older one is more men driven, while this one is the big bad guy's a woman, which I think completely changes the dynamic of the messaging anyways, and I'm not sure if that was realized.
I liked the premise of the newer one more.
Well, I do too, because it's my last note on here, but I think both movies don't fully understand, and even the book, I don't think either one of the three fully understands what their actual message is. Because the book in the original movie is supposed to be this questioning of the woman in the home, kind of, or, be that ironic satire, how women have been forced to do that for so long, right?
Right.
And especially in the movie, because the book, I didn't realize this because we didn't talk about it when we compared the two, the difference in clothing for the Stepford Wives. Because in the book, apparently, it's more form-fitting clothing that shows off their bodies and is more sexually suggestive. So they're wearing like halter tops so their midriffs can be seen.
I honestly can't remember.
Well, I listened to the Faculty of Horror before we watched both movies again to make notes. And they talked about that. And I don't buy this one. I think this is BS. Apparently in some documentary, somebody said the reason why they changed the clothing choices for the women is because of Carol. Because of her less than petite figure. I'm like, I don't know. She seems perfectly fine to me. She's 70s hot. I mean, it was her decision to make it more Victorian style, but it was for a different reason. That's what they described it as. It's definitely more 50s style dress in the movie. Oh, but the hitting on that, so I think the original movie tries to focus more on like the 1950s style housewife, which is referenced in the opening credits of the newer movie with the World of Tomorrow stuff and the 1950s style ads for cleaning stuff, women cleaning the house and everything.
Yes.
Whereas I think the newer movie focuses more on marital problems and how these even not even the higher end jobs like CEOs and VPs and stuff, just having both parents working and that everybody from the bottom up has to work so much to for their livelihood, whatever level of the class system they're in. And that puts a lot of strain on the family dynamic as a whole. Because it's the big contention for most of the men in the newer movie is that they're playing second fiddle. Well, it's played that they're playing second fiddle, but it's nobody's really home to do anything.
Yes.
And like Pete and Kim, Joanna and Walter's children, are in their devices all the time. They're not paying attention to their parents because their parents aren't paying attention to them. But again, I think that's
Walter
the message that's missed.
Walter even comes out and says, "Your children don't even know you."
Yeah. And usually we see that dynamic again with the upper middle class, upper middle class, and wealthy people in film and TV. But it is something that spans the entire economic spectrum. Anyways,
I did question though while watching the older one, why you would want in the 70s time period as a man your wife to go from dressing in this more showy manner to the more dowdy look.
more conservative look.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. I get it more in the newer one because, you're going from sweatpants and just rolled out of bed to clean and actually dressed in real clothes.
Well, and again, in the newer one with, what's her name? Claire? Glenn Close's character?
Claire.
With Claire being the one in charge, she is pushing a more conservative narrative with it too. Because there's more emphasis on the Christianity and maybe even some slight racism when it comes to Bobby, because Bobby's Jewish. So, at the very least, anti-Semitism. But, those are some extra added elements. It's like almost like they're trying to cram as much in there as possible to one of those types of movies.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's hard for me to say because it seems like people don't like this movie. The newer one.
It's got some...
But I thought it was okay.
It's got some weird moments, but I definitely prefer the premise of it to...
Well, it's got moments in there that are done specifically for the sake of comedy without it being a natural, like when they're in the Stanford house. When they're in the Sanford house, and they find the remote for Sarah, and they accidentally make her boobs too big and they don't see what's going on. That's a very unnatural comedic scene.
It is.
Shoved in something that was already fairly comedic at the moment. Which is part of the reason why it toes the line of being a parody, because it relies so much more heavily on our more modern concept of satire, which being the comedy, the South Park style.
Yes. Because, like, the remotes, the
ATM,
ATM.
the odd one-liners from what's his name? I mean, they're freaking hilarious, but it's that push too far. This could have been a very smart comedy, and it's not fart and dick joke dumb, but
No, but it had its moments
it's low
of
class
smart comedy too.
Low class comedy.
When Mike says, they call me Mike because it's where I used to work. Microsoft is that little jab at Disney, and then I worked at AOL, and is that why the women are so slow? There were some smarter ones in there.
There was some smarter ones.
But off topic again. I like the premise of this one more because I like that it takes it a step further, because in the older movie, Diz says, we thought of it first. And
you're just upset because we thought of it first.
Yeah, you would have done it too, but we thought of it first. Paraphrasing, of course.
Yeah.
So in the newer one, it comes off as the men have actually thought of it first, but it's a woman that did and is doing it through them. And I also like that
there's the jab at the original one too, because you're just upset because while you were busy trying to become men, we became gods. God, Christopher Walken's always a win. Anyways.
But I also like that it gets like both sides. Like, yes, the men of Stepford these ones honestly wanted more toys than the older one did.
That's part of where it loses me a little bit with the messaging, because the men, even though there's supposedly have these high level jobs like NASA, AOL, Microsoft, and they're fully competent, they're all dolts. They're your stereotypical 90s, early 2000s, what are those evening shows called? Sitcoms dads.
Yes.
Where they're idiots and they can't ever do anything right and they just want to play and essentially just be grown-up children.
Because the older one, you definitely get the clear message that the men do want their wives to be home, to take...
It's a power thing.
Yeah, to take care of their house, their kids, to just be there. And in the newer one, they want toys, but they do want this simpler time. And because it's Claire who's actually orchestrating it all, it shows that sometimes women want the simpler thing too.
It does make that message a lot more clear. Because in the older one, you only really get it through... God, I'm getting their names all screwed up now. Carol?
Yeah.
When what's enough for me might not be enough for you, but I'm happy taking care of my family. And before, you realize that she's a robot, that's a powerful message. It's a powerful statement. But it doesn't land on these people. It doesn't make them question things. Which is why, so going into where the messaging is lost in the older one is that it would be a lot stronger if you had Joanna struggling personally with, does she want to be a housewife? Does she want to do the photography thing? They move there for her to do the photography more. So she leans into it. And because she's leaning into it, and because of Bobby, the housework starts slipping, and that becomes a bit of contention between her and Walter. More than... It actually becomes a level of contention rather than just normal, everyday living in your house mess, which is what her house usually is.
Yeah.
I never get the sense that her house is messy. But, Bobby's is worse than hers, and that's demonstrated through Bobby's careless opening of the paper and rolling it up. She just kind of haphazardly crumbles it around until she finds what she's looking for. Yeah. And then just rolls it up like that. She doesn't try to put it back neat and nice like most people would. And it that would have made the messaging in the original a lot stronger, because you have a personal conflict with it, an internal conflict with it, but you also have this external conflict with it.
But as I was saying, but I can relate with Claire, and I think lots of us can sometimes, that we just, wouldn't it be nice to have the simpler times? It especially does. Under circumstances of high stress, because she did this after a high stress situation where she also lost her mind.
And murdered 2 people.
But she was under a lot of stress and strain, and it led to her wanting this simpler situation, and we're all under this greater stress now, and wouldn't it be nice to just have this simpler time?
That does speak to a larger social conversation that we're having right now in America, maybe other parts of the Western world, where people want government to just give us things. We're this great rich country, why can't the government just give us things? And there's the trade-off of that. But the reason why people want it is that way they can sit at home and play video games more, so they can explore their artistic endeavors, so that way they can have a simpler life. Because we do, but a lot of people also forget that without farmers, without the food processing plants or packing plants, whatever, without the carpenters and engineers, without all these people doing these jobs, you would have to do those things yourself. So your life wouldn't actually be simpler there if people just didn't work, because we wouldn't have food or anything. Like, we have to do these things.
I think if Claire hadn't been crazy, she could have actually been successful with her Stepford endeavor without doing robots, that there would be enough other women like her who also wanted this simpler life of staying at home and taking care of the house and the children and just going to book club and other lady things.
Well, and there are. I think it would be safe to say that most conservative women do want that life. And, really, there's nothing wrong with that. In a lot of ways, it could actually be more beneficial to society for one of the parents to stay at home, because you have somebody there to help with the kids and actually be involved with their raising, because that's something that's missing in society now, is parents' involvement. I get so sick so many times when I see posts on Facebook. Why aren't they teaching how to do these basic things like changing a tire, checkbook, taxes? Like, that shouldn't be on the school. That's your job as a parent. You're failing your kids, not the school system. Like the clock thing. How kids can't read an analog clock anymore. Which falls a little bit on the school too, but that can fall on your parents too.
But that is something that both movies have, though, is because the conflict caused and the fights caused by everybody working. Because that is one thing that both Walters and Joanna's in both movies had a problem with. Because Walter says, I work 80 hours a week and this is what I come home to, and it's the work stress, and you're trying to do your photography thing, so now there's a hole that needs filled. And Walter and Joanna in the newer one are both working. And
high-level jobs, too.
High-level jobs.
Like, and this is part of my problem with them being dolts and whinies, that, like, he's got a high-level job. Sure, he's not the CEO, but isn't he, like, VP of something? That's a high-level job. Like, that's almost as good as being the CEO or the president. You're the vice president of You oversee this entire section of the company. Whatever it is. What else do we got?
I've got a cat.
The difference of the women's clubs, we kind of touched on that a little bit. In the book, and no, they do have one in the book. No, they're trying to set it up again.
They're trying to set it up again. They did, but it went away exactly like in
the movie, the
older movie. But there's definitely a clear reason why in the newer movie there is this day spa and the book club. It's because Glenn Close isn't a robot and she needs these interactions.
Well, that, and it's a very selfish thing for her, what she's actually doing. Everything that she's doing there is for her. Sure, some people maybe are helped out through it, but it's very much about her and what she wants. Because the women in the new one don't focus as much time on cleaning and stuff, probably because they have the smart house that does it for them.
Probably.
But they get to be this televised idea of what the 1950s housewife was. This media concept that she just got to be a wife and do whatever fancy flight came across her throughout the day. Like going to the spa, going to work out, tea time, book club, whatever.
Brunch.
Day
drinking.
Whereas there, it is very much about, it's keeping them busy in a different way, because that's definitely a message. It's kind of in both. Keep them busy so that way they can't collect and fight back or whatever.
Don't lick my hair.
So some of that media, just again with the original, kind of missing its mark. Because when they're trying to get their club going, this is the first time it really hits home that the women are speaking like ads.
Yeah.
And again, I'm going to hit on that 1950s style ads. Which, I mean, the marketing hasn't really changed too terribly much. They just, we have smarter words now, or whatever. Or seemingly smarter words. But because in that first meeting that we see, they're trying to talk about their home lives and what they think is going on at the men's association. Kind of, it's the men get together and just kind of rant about the women. So they're trying to get women together to just rant about the men.
That's not what it's supposed to be.
It's not, but she even says, I don't want this to be a bitching session, and then immediately starts bitching.
No, she says it kind of starts as a bitching session, but hopefully we can get it to go somewhere.
Anyways, none of the other women, because they're not programmed for individual thought or anything, they can't come up with naturals. They're having the problem I'm having right now.
Words.
They're not able to naturally form a thought because it's all programmed into them. They go to what they know, which is talking about cleaning. And you get the very ad style. I use this because it cleans, sparkles my stuff or whatever. But on to my point with that is part of where the messaging is missed is it would be nice to see that on the TV in the older one, just in the background. It doesn't have to be in your face or whatever. But, just little snippets of ads, like, here's this ad for this thing, and then the woman talks about it in, like, the exact same way later. Or something. The use of irony to make a statement. There's just not enough setup for it in the older one for me to classify it as a satire. It's just a straight up metaphor.
Straight up?
But, like you were saying, in the newer one, they already have their clubs and stuff, but it doesn't really mean anything because it's just Glenn Close. It's just Claire living out her fantasy.
Yes, and she has to have it not just because it's her control of the world though. It's because even though she's lost her mind, we are social creatures, and even if they are robots, she can't stay in her house and just clean all day as an actual person.
Yeah.
Because even housewives
You would go
didn't
crazy.
actual housewives didn't just stay in their house and clean all day.
No, they had book clubs, they had quilting bees, they had
Women's
sewing
associations.
circles. I'm being a stereotyping asshole.
Charities that they would...
Charity drives, PTO. You know, all these things that built a sense of community and brought everybody together as one unified group of people with common interest of their community growing and thriving.
Bridge club.
And oftentimes when the men were having their men meetings in the 50s and 40s and whatever, women were doing the same thing. They were having their meetings and actually talking about stuff, not just doing chores. I mean, obviously the hostess has to be, and the hosts have to do their part, but for the most part, it wasn't just the women sitting there making sure the children weren't destroying the house. Usually the kids were in bed in the evening ones, which is more specifically what I'm talking about. Should have qualified that a little bit better. I think this is a point of contention for us a little bit, because I like in the original one how there's more of a mystique around the men's association.
Yeah.
Because it's the unseen. So they're doing all this weird stuff. You're like, what's actually going on with these people? And two, it's because we see it from Joanna's perspective, where maybe this is why we get it. The newer movies, a dual perspective of this struggle, this balance struggle between men and women, even though most of the movie is from Joanna's perspective.
Yeah.
We do get a little bit of Walter's perspective. But I just, as far as like a thriller or a semi-horror, that adds more to that suspenseful element of what's actually going on here. This is weird. I don't like it.
Well, it's actually too within the second movie. They start with clips from those two reality shows, Balance of Power and I Can Do Better, and they very obviously call back to the I Can Do Better because she says the line I can do better.
Yeah.
But it's more subtly. They also do call back to an actual not the reality show Balance of Power, but they actually do balance the power in their relationship.
It's supposed to. I mean, Walter does become more outspoken because he does start hanging out with men. And he gets that masculine feedback that as a man is healthy to have. And there can be a point where it can become negative, but that same thing can happen with women, where when you get too much of that feedback or the wrong kind, it can become negative. In the forms of toxic masculinity and femininity. So yeah, I suppose there is a little bit more of balancing of power, but not really by the end. And that's where a lot of the messaging gets lost, I think, for me, is that Joanna's the only one that really kind of learns any lesson, but only half-assedly. Like, she goes back to doing what she's supposed to be doing, and it's implied that he's more of a partner in it. But it when she asks him about it, it's like that false sense of equality in their relationship. Because like, isn't that right, honey? Oh yeah, that's totally right. Whatever you say.
Hold my purse.
Hold my purse. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about pretty much everything on my list here, except for this one kind of bothers me that, and the newer one, because it's 2004, and we had this thing of women keeping their maiden names, which, if that's what your family wants to do it. I find it ironic in a kind of negative way, I guess, that they have Joanna keep her maiden name as Eberhart, which is Walter's name in the book and the original movie. Whereas it would have been a more powerful statement for her to keep her actual maiden name of Ingalls and have Walter still be Eberhart. Like that's not that bad of a thing.
Yeah.
You have any final thoughts?
Nope.
Yeah, so that was our little comparison of the two.
That was a hot mess.
That was a hot mess, but it was a conversation between two people, and we'll get better about doing it as things go on. I don't know, it's kind of hard.
Will we though? Because this is kind of what our conversations always sound like when we're even when we're not recording them. This is just how we talk to each other. I don't think we can improve on what we always do.
I suppose, but it's a good way to get those ideas flowing and out there, and because otherwise we sound a little too robotic if we try to control what we're saying. I like this more natural discussion type. And yeah, I know it probably comes off a bit messy sometimes. Anyways, that's completely unrelated to wrapping this up. So, anyways, thanks for listening. Do all the things I said at the top of the show. And toodles.